We want to do it in a peaceful way.
I always speak in English.
I have a dream.
In English, I feel I can read better. I speak Welsh and English.
For us to be or not to be.
I fought alongside them in Korea.
And it's an affection of the two little capsules, one on each
People
side.
get an exhibition of pictures of London. They expect to see things in the
Or that you, as an artist, could in some way be manipulated.
Voices speaking with the English accent known as RP, or received pronunciation. Sometimes called the Queen's English, and often thought typical of England. It's an accent heard in every part of the country, but only a small minority of the population actually use it. It's a powerful minority, however. RP is associated with class, upper class, with power, prestige and privilege. RP has also been used as a standard accent in dictionaries and on the BBC.
Hello, Radio Olympia. This is direct television from the studios at the Alexander Palace.
But how did RP emerge? Has it stayed the same over the years? And what's happening to RP now? John Wells is one of the leading experts on English accents.
RP, received pronunciation, is the pronunciation that is generally accepted as being a standard, as being correct, as many people would see it. The idea is that within England, someone who's speaking RP doesn't give you any clues as to what part of England they come from.
We haven't always had the idea of a single prestige standard accent throughout the country.
When you couldn't easily travel, the conditions didn't exist for the creation of a standard pronunciation. I think the big change really came at the end of the 18th century, Industrial Revolution, and then in the 19th century with the coming of the railways, which meant that people were able to move about the country in a way they couldn't do previously. The public schools were very important because they were geographically decentralised and they took their pupils from all different parts of the country under circumstances that caused them to adopt something uniform.
The accent that developed didn't only affect people in England.
Clearly, although RP is essentially English of England, it has an influence that's much wider. The Scots and the Irish don't on the whole look to RP as their standard. Nevertheless, England is so big and powerful an influence on them in speech as in other things that you can often see Scottish people who have modified their speech in the direction of English, which means usually RP.
Jack Aitken is a well-known authority on Scottish English.
The effect of RP, or the effect of English before RP existed, on Scottish English began a long time ago. The first stage, which took place in the 17th century, was effectively an adjustment of broad Scots speech to something like English.
18th century Edinburgh was a magnet for talented individuals, many of whom looked to Southern English as the model for their speech.
Some visitor to Edinburgh said in the 18th century that he could stand at more or less at the place where I was in the street and shake by the hand half a dozen men of genius. Well, these men of genius were in the forefront of the anglicising of Scottish speech. When I come into this room, I remember how the Scots language was changed by people who would haunt this place looking for books like me. Thinking of RP today, there are 350,000 people who were born in England now living in Scotland, and the figure has been increasing with every census. Far from all of them are RP speaking, but obviously a good proportion are. Since the middle of the 18th century, Scottish aristocrats have routinely sent their sons either to public schools in England or direct into the Army or Navy, and this has continued to the present day. Every member of the Scottish aristocracy is an RP speaker. A third source is a limited number of Scottish public schools, which turn out RP speakers. So in all these ways, RP is a powerful influence on Scottish society. It is a power in Scottish society.
But RP, like any accent, is not static. Linguists have analysed the way it varies and changes over time, and even to an untutored ear, the accent of one of the first BBC announcers sounds old-fashioned.
The vision and sound are on. The station goes on the air.
Hello, Radio Olympia. This is direct television from the studios at the Alexander Palace. And now
On BBC Radio in the 1930s, and therefore also in the very earliest television, we get received pronunciation of the old-fashioned type.
Jean's leopard coat is particularly suitable for sportswear and point-to-point meetings. Under it she has on a high-neck dress in a tulip design of red, green, blue, white and black.
Take Sylvia Peters, for example. You can hear her using I in a word like television, where nowadays we might say television, or witnessed, where we might now say witnessed, or majesty, where we might now say majesty.
And for the first time in history, through the medium of television, the ancient and noble rite of a coronation service will be witnessed by millions of Her Majesty's subjects.
It's the Prince's hope that this new group identity will help the charities that bear his name go from strength to strength.
If you turn to contemporary RP-speaking television announcers, you can see perhaps not so much smoothing, fire sometimes rather than fire, some L's perhaps vocalised, shelf rather than shelf, certainly some glottal stops, Scotland on occasion rather than Scotland, Jenny Bond says charity rather than charity.
One of the most important branches of the Trust's work is helping young people set up in business when no one else will fund them. It claims a unique success rate, with 60% of the projects it's backed still trading after 3 years, compared with 40% of those supported by banks. That record and the Trust's whole style has impressed others in the charity field.
A closer look at the archetypal RP speakers shows clearly how RP has changed.
If you think about the very earliest clips we have of the Queen when she was a girl, you can see her pronunciation was really very antiquated by today's standards. She says happier, where nowadays you'd expect happier. She says good night, where nowadays we'd have probably good night. Change in the quality of the I.
To make the world of tomorrow a better and happier place. My sister is by my side, and we are both going to say good night to you. Come on, Margaret. Good night, children. Good night, and good luck to you all.
In more recent examples, you can see that the Queen has herself changed her pronunciation over the time. She says things like mass and ban nowadays, rather than the mass and ban we might have had from an earlier time.
To prevent proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, they will take part constructively in negotiations on a verifiable and comprehensive nuclear test ban.
It's often claimed, actually, see, that the royal family don't say ow, they say I, and they go dine rather than downtown. You've only got to examine their speech fairly carefully and you'll see that this is not really true.
And we must cherish them, for they have served us well down the centuries. Victory and the peace it brought...
On the other hand, she clearly reflects a generation that is different from the sort of speech we see in the generation of Prince Charles.
Once again, I find myself in Cardiff taking part in a freedom ceremony. At least as a result of my last visit in June, I have the advantage of knowing what happens to a person who has been given the city's freedom.
He's often held up as a kind of example of upper-class, indeed noticeably upper-class speech, which I suppose is fair enough. But again, I think it's true to say that he has been gradually updating his speech and his pronunciation. You can hear that every now and again he does use an E rather than an I at the end of a word. We've got opportunity rather than opportunity.
For a whole year, I've wanted to find a suitable opportunity to express my despair and outrage at the unmentionable horrors being perpetrated in southern Iraq.
On the other hand, he smooths. He doesn't say our for 60 minutes. He says ah. And as we've seen, the tendency seems to be more and more to move away from that and to go back to the earlier, slower, more careful pronunciation, our.
How many more obscene lies do we have to be told before action is actually taken? Even at the 11th hour, ladies and gentlemen, it is still not too late to prevent a total cataclysm.
Knightsbridge in London, close to Sloane Square, where many Sloane Rangers come to do their shopping. People here might be expected to favour RP. So what do they think of the way the royal family speaks?
Oh, I think that her English is beautiful. I mean, I think, you know, she's a joy to listen to.
I think the Queen's speech is a little bit stilted, really, not very natural.
More and more these days, people think that it's probably a toffee-nosed and snobby accent.
I think it's very nice. I think the tourist people consider it to be very nice as well.
Though the royal family's pronunciation is changing, for some people it still sounds quite outdated. But outside the confines of royal circles, John Wells has noted that RP is changing faster as younger RP speakers are bringing new features into the accent.
If we take a word like department, I was there using a glottal stop before the M. I didn't say department, but as most people normally do, department. That's a glottal stop. If I were even more in line with current trends, perhaps I would be saying department, with another glottal stop at the end as well. And what we see is this glottal stop gradually extending its range of positions in words where it occurs. The other one is the L consonant. What's happening to the consonant L is that it's ceasing to be made again with the tongue tip and turning into a kind of vowel rather like a W. So that in a word like shelf, you get people saying shelf. A word like milk, you get milk. That's this vocalization of L, which is now spreading out very widely, ceasing to be a stigmatized Cockney vulgarism, becoming a general pronunciation.
But it isn't only linguists who are interested in the changes occurring in RP. The heart of London's West End, Theatreland. Anyone who goes to drama school in order to work in these theatres will have to learn to use RP, even if it means losing their own accent. Joan Washington is a dialect coach and trains actors to get the right accent for the character they're playing. Like John Wells, she's concerned about different varieties of RP, but she focuses on pace and intonation as well as pronunciation.
What I try to find for the actor is an appropriate model suitable to the character that they're playing. So it's got to be somebody of the right sex and of the right sort of age group because of RP changing so much. The older-fashioned RP, the RP of the 50s, had very much flatter tunes. And they certainly had an impression that people talk much faster. And in fact, in drama schools at that time, they were encouraged to never drop cues and to really get quite a lick behind it and go straight to the point. Whereas nowadays, with the Sloane Ranger accents, there's a very clear tendency to sound slightly minor key, slightly dying fall, and slightly blasé.
Like any speech pattern, RP will have changed an awful lot this century. Because it is RP and because it is the most noted accent, perhaps we have more information about how it's changed.
Don't put it like that, Mother. Of course I am sorry to leave you. Why, you are the best mother in the whole world. But after all, as Lord Illingworth says, it is impossible to live in such a place as Rockley.
Can we take it a stage further? Because it was written at the turn of the century. Just take it to period RP. So that a word like why would have an H in front of it, why, There are no whales around Wales, so there's a difference.
Yes.
And a word ending in, like, sorry, go to the I vowel.
A lot of it's more clipped.
I suppose it's that word clipped that we associate with RP. Yes,
Right,
that's one of its characteristics. When you get a word like man, it'd probably be near a man, near the air sound. That has shifted. Do you want to just try those and see if that...
Yeah. Don't put it like that, Mother. Of course I am sorry to leave you. Why, you are the best mother in the whole world. But after all, as Lord Illingworth says, it is impossible to live in such a place as Rockley. You don't... Was it Rockley?
That's slightly, but even place.
Right.
Yeah.
Place.
It's that A diphthong there. Place. Just got its own space.
Yeah.
I think it is true to say that the majority of authority figures in a Shakespeare production will speak what we would roughly call RP. It's equally important to state that a company like the RSC does not have an RP policy. I think a decision for an actor to play an RP is caught up with so many other issues, career, audience expectation, etc. But an actor should not feel that that is the only way to speak Shakespeare. Clearly it was not spoken in that way in Shakespeare's time, and I think that's very important. But I have to concede that the majority of parts will sound as though they are in RP or within a band of RP.
Very few serious leading Shakespearean roles at the Royal National Theatre or Stratford have ever been played in any accent that was not RP. But some actors are beginning to challenge this. A Northern theatre company is fast gaining a reputation for the quality of its Shakespearean productions. It's currently rehearsing in a South London youth club.
Now, I've never really been able to lose my accent at all. I could never do RP. I was always bottom of the class at college. You know, there is rhythm in glass and laugh and bath, if you say it like that. I find no rhythm in laugh or bath or grass. A, it's slower automatically, and B, it's not percussive and contrapuntal. And, you know, the northern languages, from about Nottingham upwards, including the whole of Scotland, at their best in terms of heightened language for the stage, have short vowels and good, hard, concrete consonants. And it's the consonants that give it the toughness and the vitality and, for me, the real excitement, rhythmic excitement.
In this scene, King Richard, who has murdered his way to the crown, is trying to persuade Queen Elizabeth to plead his suit with her daughter in order to consolidate his throne.
Hear a wooer's tale, and when this arm of mine had chastised the petty rebel, dull-brained Buckingham, bound with triumphant garlands will I come and lead thy daughter to a conqueror's bed, and she shall be sole victoress, Caesar's Caesar.
What were I best to say? Her father's brother would be her lord, or should I say her uncle? Or he that slew her brothers and her uncles? Under what title shall I woo for thee, that God, the law, my honour and her love, can make seem pleasing to her tender years?
Infer fair England's peace by this alliance,
Which she shall purchase with still-lasting war.
say that the king which may command entreats.
That at her hands which the king's king forbids.
Say I will love her everlastingly.
But how long will that title ever last?
As long as heaven and Richard lengthens it.
As long as hell and Richard likes of it.
The whole point about Shakespeare usually is that it's terribly posh, and that people's inclination when they're doing Shakespeare is to talk as poshly as they can possibly manage. So it is the bizarre thing, not only because it's going back to find your own accent, but actually because you're doing something that everyone's always told you has to be the most beautifully, poetically spoken thing in the world. So it is a complete contradiction, really, in terms of the sort of work that I've done before.
Hark not on that string, madam, that is past.
Hark when it still shall I do heartstrings break.
Now by my George, my garter and my crown.
Profane, dishonouring, the herd usurped.
I swear.
Thy nothing, for this is no oath. Thy George profaned hath lost his holy honour. Thy garter blemished pawned his knightly virtue. Thy crown usurped disgraced his kingly glory. If something thou would swear to be believed, swear then by something thou hast not wronged.
Now by the world.
'Tis full of thy foul wrongs.
My father's father's death.
Thy life hath he dishonoured.
Why then myself?
Thyself is self-misused.
Why then by God?
God's wrong is most of all. If thou hadst fear to break...
Classical Scottish theatre has also been a bastion of RP. But here too it is being challenged by writers like Liz Lochhead.
Unfortunately, in Scottish theatre, RP still has far too much of a sway. It's the accent of a class, and particularly of an economic band. And there's no reason for this to dominate all discourse, debate, all theatre in another country. It's about politics, culture, cultural imperialism.
Her play involves actors switching between English with an RP accent and Scots, and aims to put Scottish speech centre stage.
I wonder if you can still put a smile on her face.
Most of this play is about various different shifting things with language. Comedy and nostalgia have been traditionally the area for anything called dialect. And I wanted to prove that you could do passion and love and drama in Scots.
In this scene, Queen Mary's maid Bessie and her lover are discussing the Queen's love life.
Fucking monkey, man.
When you ken the ways of the world as well as this old Todd Foxwell man here,
Does it not occur to you? Maybe she used Davy Rizzio because he's the only man who's ever touched her without he wants to trouble her.
So some theatre companies are challenging RP's dominance. But in society generally, are attitudes changing?
The actual groundswell of the way people act is towards a more democratic use of speech. And there's still, you know, Colonel so-and-so of whatever will complain that the weather's done in a Scots accent or a Welsh accent or Liverpool. Who cares? You know, they're all dying out. The quicker the better.
Recent research in Scotland suggests there's been a change in attitude towards RP. It's still a prestige accent, but it also arouses considerable hostility.
The notion of being a little more resentful of RP is coming through. I always said that RP was an accent which simultaneously raised hackles and overawed. The common attitude to RP is becoming more hostile than it formerly was.
So with attitudes shifting and accents changing, is there still a place for RP? Will people in Britain retain their regional and class-based accents, or will accents begin to merge? Trends seem to indicate RP and other accents will stay, though regional and social differences will be less marked.
It's not just RP that is not localisable, but speech in general. The rough edges are being worn smooth by the fact that we all travel around, we all contact people, we all talk to people from other parts of the country. Again, don't forget that it's only in the last 100 years that we've had, less than that even, we've had telephones and other ways of talking directly to people in other parts of the country. Now, of course, it's not just a matter of the country, but the world, and we're all exposed to American English, Australian English, West Indian English, and so on, in a way that previous generations couldn't dream of. And this means that everybody, perhaps, is tending to leave aside very special peculiarities of their own accent and move towards something that is more general and perhaps more bland.
I think we're going away from Queen's English. I do like to hear people speaking properly, so I mean, I'm not a good example.
They should speak as they are, a bit like myself, being a Londoner and dropping a few of the H's.
And I think there are fewer people now with an extreme accent of any kind.
The class system still lingers on and people do make these judgments.
English is being ruined in England. We are so careless with our own language.
It's no my accent, it's your ears.